The rule was spoken like scripture in Ravensmere Hall. No music, no song, no hum from the scullery, not one note, in 10 long years. Frances Calthorpe knelt on the flagstones of the great vestibule, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a wet brush moving in slow circles across the cold Cornish stone. Her cap was plain white cotton. Her dress was the color of a dead November leaf. In the household ledger she was written down as Frances Ackley, housemaid. Only a garnet heart, hidden beneath her bodice on a faded ribbon, remembered another name and another life at the piano. Mrs. Polgreen recited the rule again above her, keys clinking at her waist. No music, no song, not one note. And then a boot struck the marble at the far end of the hall, and the housekeeper fell silent. Fitzroy Ackland, Earl of Garstang, crossed the vestibule without looking down. Tall, in black wool and colder linen, a burn scar running from his temple to his collar, a signet ring dull on his right hand. He passed her without a glance. Then the tin pail beside her knee tipped an inch and rang, once, against the stone. The Earl stopped, only half a second. His scarred jaw did not turn, but something in the set of his shoulders changed, as if a note he had forbidden the world had just brushed the edge of his hearing. He walked on. Frances did not lift her eyes, but what she found 3 weeks later, under 4 dust sheets in the closed west-north wing, would break a decade of silence. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. November of 1819 lay over Cornwall like a wet gray shawl, and Ravensmere Hall wore it without complaint. Rain had been falling since before dawn. Inside the great vestibule of black and white marble, Frances Ackley knelt beside a wooden pail and scrubbed a stain that was older than her employment. She wore the feuille morte gown of coarse remended wool, an apron of gray linen tied too high, and a plain cotton cap that flattened the dark waves she had once been proud of. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Her fingers, longer than a housemaid's fingers ought to be, moved the brush in slow half-circles. She kept her back straight. A straight back was the last dignity a Calthorpe daughter still owned, and she wore it without thinking, the way other women wore rings. Above her, Mrs. Harriet Polgreen counted keys. The iron ring at the housekeeper's waist chimed thinly, and each chime marked another line of the same speech Frances had heard for 11 weeks. The rules of the house. The list existed nowhere in writing, and every servant knew it by heart. No candles in the west wing after 9, said Mrs. Polgreen. No fires laid in the north gallery. No mention of the late countess before the master, nor before any guest. No visitors to the servants' hall save on Sunday afternoon. No whistling, no humming. She paused, as she always paused, before the last one. And no music. Not a note, not a bar, not a tune between the teeth. Not in this house. Frances did not lift her head. Yes, Mrs. Polgreen. You have said yes 11 times, girl. I should like to hear that you have understood it once. I have understood it, Mrs. Polgreen. Then say why. Frances kept the brush moving. She had learned, in her first week, that the housekeeper did not want the true answer. She wanted the answer that closed the matter. Because his lordship wills it so. Because his lordship wills it so. Mrs. Polgreen let the keys fall silent against her black bombazine skirt. And a good girl in a good house does not ask further. No, Mrs. Polgreen. The housekeeper looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable. Her small dark eyes traveled from the cap to the reddened knuckles to the 2 straight spine, and something behind them narrowed. She had noticed the spine on the first day. She had not yet decided what to do about it. The clock in the long gallery wants winding, she said at last. You will attend to it when this floor is dry. Mind you do not touch the pendulum with a wet hand. No, Mrs. Polgreen. The keys resumed their small iron speech. Mrs. Polgreen moved off toward the servants' stair, and the vestibule was left to Frances and the rain. She let out a breath she had not meant to hold. Her hand, still wrapped around the brush, trembled once and then stilled. She looked down at her own reflection in the wet marble, a pale oval face, a mouth too grave for 22, eyes the color of dark honey. A stranger looked back. That, she had also learned, was useful. Under the coarse linen of her bodice, warm against her sternum, a small weight shifted as she breathed. a garnet heart on a faded ribbon. Rundell and Bridge, London, 1811. Her father had bought it the summer before the canals. She never took it off. She dipped the brush again. It was then that the door at the far end of the vestibule opened without warning, and a boot came down on the wet floor. Frances did not look up. Servants did not look up. She heard the boot, then the second, then the pause. A long stride, a halt, then a silence that was not a servant's silence. She knew, without lifting her eyes, that it was the Earl. The house had a way of announcing him. Doors closed themselves an instant before he came near them. Voices lowered. Even the great long case clock on the landing seemed to hold its tick. He was not loud. He did not need to be. She saw first the tips of his Hessian boots, black and dulled by mud, wet halfway up. Then the fawn breeches. Then the edge of a long black riding coat, its beaver collar dark with rain. He had come in from the stables and had not surrendered his coat at the door. He stopped 3 paces from her. He did not speak. Frances kept the brush moving. It was suddenly the most difficult task in the world to move a brush. A drop fell from the hem of his coat and struck the marble beside her hand. "Girl?" She had heard his voice perhaps 4 times since her arrival. It was low and dry, without music, a voice that had been used chiefly for necessary sentences for a long time. She rose to her feet in one movement and lowered her head. "My lord." The pail rang softly as her skirt brushed it. A small tin note like a coin dropped in a well. He heard it. She felt him hear it. He was a man who had trained himself to notice small sounds, because small sounds were the ones a musical house made first. A page turning, a key struck at half pressure, a pedal released, even a tin pail. For one full heartbeat, the Earl of Garstang did not move. Frances kept her eyes on the wet marble at his boots. She did not lift them. She could see, at the edge of her vision, his right hand at his side. The glove was off. The skin from wrist to knuckle was a bright ridged pink, the mark of an old burn that had healed as burns heal, imperfectly, in shining rivers. On the smallest finger, dulled with rain, sat a heavy signet ring of matte gold, the Ackland crest, a hand that had once been like any other hand. He turned his head slightly. The scar at his right temple caught the gray light from the tall window, a rope of pale tissue running down the jaw and vanishing into the linen of his cravat. He was very tall. He held himself as if standing were a discipline he practiced. "You are new," he said. 3 months, my lord." "Your name?" "Frances Ackley, my lord." There was a pause. She did not know what he was doing in the pause. She thought, absurdly, of the way Papa had once paused before naming the key of a piece he had never seen before, listening to the room first. "Ackley," he said, as though tasting the word for a false note. He did not find one. "You struck the pail." "I beg pardon, my lord. I shall be more careful." It rang. "Yes, my lord." Another pause. He was very still. She heard the rain against the tall window and the small tick of the clock at the far end of the gallery, and her own breath moving in and out against the ribbon at her sternum. "See that it does not," he said. "No, my lord." He walked on. She did not lift her head until his boots had passed the second pair of pillars. Only then did she draw a real breath, and only then did she notice that her hand, resting on the top of the pail, was shaking hard enough to make the tin sing again, very faintly, all on its own. She pressed it flat against the metal until it stopped. That evening, in the servants' hall, the talk was of the master's temper and the master's charity, and neither, in the end, of the master himself. Frances sat at the long deal table with a bowl of peas pottage cooling before her and listened. Tom Carbis, the stable lad of 17, was cutting bread with more energy than was needed. His red hair stood up in tufts where the rain had dried it, and his chipped front tooth showed whenever he grinned, which was often. "Wager he did not speak a word to her," said one of the kitchen maids. "He never does. 3 months I was here before he saw me at all, and then it was only to ask why the fire was laid crooked." "He spoke," said Frances quietly, before she could stop herself. The table looked at her. "He spoke," she said again, because there was no unsaying it. "He asked my name." Tom whistled through his tooth. "Then you are marked, Frances Ackley. He does not ask names for nothing." "Hush your teeth, Tom Carbis," said Mrs. Polgreen from the head of the table, without looking up from her ledger. "His lordship asks what his lordship wishes to ask, and no housemaid of mine will be marked for it. Eat your bread." Tom ate his bread, but under the table, when Mrs. Polgreen turned a page, he leaned toward Francis and spoke in the low, quick way boys learn in stables. 10 years he's been like that," he said. "Not one note in this house, not a fiddle at Christmas, not a hymn at the door. My mother said there was a pianoforte once in the West Wing, in the Countess's music room, that could be heard from the village on a still evening. Now they say the room is shut up and the door nailed." "Nailed?" "That is what they say." He looked at her sidelong. "You have a face like you know what a pianoforte is, Frances Ackley." She lowered her eyes to the pottage. "Every girl knows what a pianoforte is." "Not the way you did just then." Mrs. Polgreen closed her ledger with a small dry sound, and Tom went back to his bread as if he had never spoken. Frances ate. The pottage had no salt. She was learning to prefer it that way. A Calthorpe daughter had eaten salted mutton every Sunday for 21 years, and now a Calthorpe daughter ate unsalted peas at a servant's table in Cornwall, and there was no one to whom this fact could be interesting, and that too, she had learned, was useful. She thought, without wishing to, of her Uncle Ambrose, of the last time she had seen him in the drawing-room at Calthorpe Priory, a glass of port in one hand and her father's will in the other, and a voice like warm oil explaining to a girl of 19 that the estate her father had left her was, upon closer inspection of certain instruments, not hers at all. She thought of his signet ring, cheap garnet, tapping the rim of the glass. She thought of the 6 months that had followed, of the letters unanswered, of the solicitor in London who had turned his face away, of the room in Cheapside with the yellow wall. She thought of the notice in the Morning Post. Housemaid required, Ravensmere Hall, Cornwall, no music. She had chosen it for the last 2 words. A house that had banished music would not think to ask whether its new housemaid could read it. She lifted her spoon again. Her hand no longer trembled. The clock in the long gallery wanted winding. She climbed the servants' stair with a taper shielded in a tin holder, because Mrs. Polgreen did not permit open flames after 8. The gallery was very long and very cold. Rain still ran on the tall windows, and every second window showed the black shoulder of the moor beyond the park. She reached the clock, set the taper on the console below, and opened the walnut case. The pendulum was already almost still. Someone had let it run down. She wound the weights with a small brass key, counting turns under her breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, and set the pendulum swinging with a careful push of her fingertip. Papa had taught her that too. A clock, he had said, is only a metronome that has forgotten its manners. She closed the case. She should have gone back down at once. She knew, even as her hand touched the brass key on the console, that she should have gone back down at once. Instead, she stood in the gallery and listened. The house at night made sounds a musical ear could not help arranging. The rain kept a soft, uneven rhythm on the leaded panes. Somewhere far off, a shutter tapped in a wind she could not feel. The long case clock had begun again, and its tick was very slightly slow, 1 hair behind a true second, the way Papa's old Vulliamy had always been. The wainscot creaked. The fire in the grate at the far end sighed once, low, as the last log settled. Frances closed her eyes. Under her ribs, without permission, a piece began to play. It was Marianne Ackland's Nocturne in F-sharp minor, though she did not yet know whose it was, nor that a copy of its unfinished manuscript lay less than 20 yards from where she stood, under 4 linen sheets, in a room whose door was not, in fact, nailed. She only knew that a phrase had come to her, as phrases did, unasked. 6 notes, falling, a 7th, held, a silence that wanted an 8th. Her fingers moved once against the seam of her apron, only once, the smallest possible confession, the 8th note. Then she opened her eyes and picked up the taper. At the far end of the gallery, in the great arched doorway that led to the staterooms, a figure stood in the dark. She could not see the face. She could see only the shape, very tall, very still, one shoulder against the frame, the beaver collar of a long coat still on, as if he had not surrendered it yet. A hand, ungloved, rested against the wood. The signet ring caught her taper for a single instant and went dark again. She did not know how long he had been there. She curtsied at once. Her taper shook. "My lord," he said nothing. She waited, head lowered, while her heart made a noise she was certain he could hear. "Girl," he said at last. "My lord. You are not humming." "No, my lord." You were not whistling. No, my lord. He was silent. Then, very quietly, in the voice of a man who had trained himself for a long time not to ask questions he did not wish answered. What were you doing? Frances thought of 6 notes falling and a 7th held. She thought of the garnet heart at her sternum. She thought of Ambrose Calthorpe's ring on the rim of a glass. Winding the clock, my lord. There was a pause that felt longer than the gallery. See that you continue to wind only the clock, said the Earl of Garstang, and turned, and was gone into the dark of the staterooms without another sound. Frances stood with the taper trembling in its tin. She did not go down at once. She stood in the cold gallery until the pendulum of the long case clock had counted a full minute of true seconds, and then another, and only then did she permit her hand to lower. The flame steadied. She walked back along the gallery slowly, past every second window and its black square of moor, and did not look at the arched doorway again. At the top of the servants' stair she paused. From the west wing, muffled through 2 closed doors and a length of paneling, came a sound she could not, at first, name. It was very faint. It was the sound a large piece of furniture makes when a heavy cloth is drawn partway off it, and then, after a breath, drawn back on. She stood very still. The sound did not come again. She descended to the servants' hall, put out the taper, and went to her narrow bed under the eaves, where she lay a long time with her hand pressed flat over the garnet heart, listening to a house that had banished music, and to the small, secret metronome of her own pulse, which had not agreed to be banished with it. Somewhere below her, in a room whose door was not nailed, 4 linen sheets lay over a Broadwood grand, and on its music stand, in a hand 10 years dead, a nocturne in F-sharp minor waited for its 8th note. Frances Ackley, who had once been Frances Calthorpe, did not yet know that the room was there. But her fingers, against the ribbon at her sternum, had already begun, without her leave, to count. 3 weeks after that rainy night, on a morning the color of pewter, Frances climbed the stairs to the west-north wing, with a bucket of vinegar water swinging against her knee. Mrs. Polgreen had given the order at dawn, without lifting her eyes from the ledger. The west-north rooms were to be aired and dusted before Christmas. No fires, no candles beyond what a maid could carry, and under no circumstances was any covered object to be uncovered. Frances had bowed her head and said, "Yes, Mrs. Polgreen." She had not asked what lay beneath the sheets. The stairs were narrow at the servants' turn, and widened where the family had once trodden. Dust lay along the banister like a soft gray fur. She noted, as a pianist notes intervals, how each stair complained at a different pitch. The 4th from the top sang a flat E, the 7th a wounded B. The corridor smelled of old cedar and colder stone. Every second door was locked. She had the keys from Mrs. Polgreen's 2nd ring, small and cold in her apron pocket, tied to a scrap of ribbon she had cut herself from a torn petticoat. She opened the first room and set to work. Sheets came off chairs whose legs were carved into lions with worn tongues. A pier glass showed her, faintly, in her feuille morte wool and coarse apron, her cap tight, her long fingers red at the knuckles. She did not look twice. Vanity, in this house, was a small treason. She wrung the cloth, she wiped, she replaced the sheet, she moved on. At the 3rd room she paused. The door stuck. She pressed her shoulder against it and felt something inside give way with the reluctance of a thing not opened for a decade. When it swung, the air that came out of the room touched her face like a held breath. It smelled of beeswax gone dry, of old rose oil, of something else she could not name, a paper smell, perhaps, or the memory of a fire distant enough to have become sweet. The shutters were nailed. She saw that at once. Someone had driven small iron nails through the frames into the sills, 4 to a shutter, so that no maid, no wind, no accident could open them again. Gray light came in only through the transom, high and dusty, falling in a single narrow bar across the floorboards. In that bar of light stood a shape. It was a large shape, oblong, taller than a chest and longer than a settle, and it was covered by 4 sheets. She counted them, because counting steadied her. 1 draped over the whole, beneath that, a coarser hemp cloth. Beneath that, a length of blue baize. Beneath that, closest to whatever slept there, a fine white linen, yellowed at the folds. 4 sheets, as one might wrap a body. She set the bucket down without a sound. She should have turned. She should have shut the door, locked it, gone back to Mrs. Polgreen and asked, in the voice of a stupid girl, which piece of furniture was under all the covers so she might dust around it. She should have taken up her bucket and walked away. Her feet took her forward. The first sheet she folded neatly, corner to corner, as her mother had taught her when she was 6 and learning to be useful. The hemp came next. It was stiff and left a dry grit on her palms. She shook it out and folded it also, though her hands trembled now, and set it upon a chair. The blue baize was heavier. It slid off with a soft sigh. She stood very still. The linen beneath was long and shaped in a way that told her, before her mind consented, what lay beneath it. The sweep of the curve at the far end. The straight line, longer than a man was tall, running toward her. The 3 narrow columns at her end where the legs would be. She lifted the linen in both hands and drew it back. The broadwood stood in the gray bar of light, as if it had been waiting for someone to come. It was mahogany, dark as steeped tea, with brass inlay at the case corners tarnished to a dull green. The lid was closed and locked. Above the closed lid, on a slender wire stand still fixed to the case, sat a bound folio of manuscript paper. A silver ribbon marker hung from between its leaves. Dust had settled on the folio in a fine, even layer, unbroken. Frances took one step and stopped. For nearly a decade no one had come near this room. The dust said so, the nails in the shutters said so, and yet the folio had been left open upon its stand as if the player had only risen to answer a knock at the door. She did not touch the keys. She did not try the lid. She lifted the folio with both hands, slowly, as one lifts a sleeping child, and turned it toward the light. The paper was cream, hand-ruled, of the sort sold in Truro at Mr. Warren's shop before the war. The ink was iron gall, browned but legible. At the top of the first page, in a woman's hand, slanted, small, patient, was written a single word: Marianne. Frances did not know she had stopped breathing until her chest asked her, quietly, to begin again. Beneath the name, in the same careful hand, Nocturne in D-flat, for my little F, second attempt, and beneath that, a date, May 1809, 6 months before the fire. Frances turned the page. The manuscript was not fair copied. It was a working score, alive with second thoughts. Bars were struck through with a single slanting line, redrawn beneath. In the margin of the 3rd page a note ran in a hurried scrawl: the E-flat too sweet, try G natural, sharpen the sorrow. At the foot of the 5th page, another: he must hear it, and know I am not afraid. Frances read the phrase twice. Her thumb moved of itself along the staves. The right hand rose and fell in the melody of a woman who had known how to walk her fingers into a room and change its temperature. The left hand answered with a chord that turned a small grief into a large one, and then, at the last minim, forgave it. She turned another page, and another. The nocturne climbed toward a modulation that Frances, who had read every score her father had left before the sale, recognized as bold for its year. It moved from D-flat into A major without apology, a door thrown open onto a garden. It held that garden for 8 bars. It stepped back through the door, quieter, and gathered itself for a return to the first theme. And there it stopped, mid-phrase. The last bar was half-written. 3 notes stood in the treble clef. In the bass, an unfinished chord waited for a 5th that had not been given. After that, the ruled staves ran on, empty, page after page of empty staves, as if the composer had set down her quill to fetch a cup of tea and had never come back. Frances found her hand at her sternum, holding, through the coarse cloth, the garnet heart on its ribbon. Marianne Ackland, born a Trevithick of Bodmin, married the young Fitzroy Ackland in the spring of 1806. Frances had that from her mother, who had that from the county paper. Marianne had died in the West Wing fire of November 1809 with her infant daughter in her arms, while her son, 13 years old and back from school for the half-term, had broken open the door and burned his hand and his face to the collar, carrying the child out. The child had lived 1 hour longer than her mother. The son had lived and had banished music. Frances knew all of that. Every servant in Cornwall knew. What she had not known, what she was only now beginning to understand, with the folio warm under her palms and dust sifting from its edges, was that the Countess had been a composer, Not a lady who touched the keys after dinner, a composer, working in secret, or in something like secret, at a nocturne she had meant her son to hear. He must hear it and know I am not afraid. Frances lowered the folio to the closed lid of the piano with the care of a woman setting down a live coal. Behind her, in the corridor, a floorboard cracked. She spun, the folio clutched to her ribs, and dropped at once into a curtsy so deep her knee touched the boards. The bucket at her side rocked. A slap of vinegar water darkened the hem of her wool. Mrs. Polgreen stood in the doorway. The housekeeper did not enter. She did not need to. Her eye went first to the sheets folded upon the chair, then to the uncovered broadwood in its bar of light, then to the folio pressed against Frances's apron. Her mouth thinned into a line so straight it might have been drawn with a rule. "Stand up, Ackley." Frances stood. "You were told not to uncover." "I was, Mrs. Polgreen." "And you uncovered." "I did." The housekeeper's hand closed around the keys at her waist. The iron sang softly against itself. "Set the paper back where you found it. Cover the instrument in the order in which you took the cloths off. Linen first, baize, hemp, sheet. Then leave this room, lock the door, and bring the key to me." Frances did as she was told. The linen went over the case with the tenderness of a shroud. The baize followed, then the hemp, then the outer sheet. The folio she replaced upon its wire stand, silver ribbon hanging as she had found it, dust resettling on its top edge in a soft, even breath she could almost measure. When she stepped back, the broadwood was again a shape beneath four cloths, and the shape was again a body. She locked the door. She gave Mrs. Polgreen the key. The housekeeper turned it once between her fingers, and then, without ceremony, dropped it not onto the ring at her waist, but into the deep pocket of her black apron. "Come." They walked in silence to the housekeeper's room off the still room, where a small coal fire burned low, and a kettle sighed on its hook. Mrs. Polgreen closed the door behind them, motioned Frances to remain standing, and sat herself at the little writing table where the household accounts lay open. For a long moment she did not speak. Her red hand rested upon the ledger. Her broad thumb moved, once, over a column of figures as if steadying herself against them. "How long have you been in this house, Ackley?" 3 weeks tomorrow, ma'am." "And in that time you have heard the rule?" "Every day, ma'am." "You have heard it read aloud from the servants' hall board on Sunday morning?" "Yes, Mrs. Polgreen." "You have heard it from my own mouth not 2 hours ago?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Polgreen lifted her eyes. They were, Frances noted with a small musician's astonishment, not angry. They were tired. They were the eyes of a woman who had once nursed a boy of 13 through the nights that followed a fire, and who now nursed the same boy, grown, through nights of a different kind. "His lordship," Mrs. Polgreen said, and paused, and began again. "His lordship does not enter that wing. In 10 years he has not set his foot upon that stair. The nails in the shutters were driven by his own hand within the month of his mother's death. Do you know what that means, Ackley?" "I believe I do, ma'am." "Say it then." Frances kept her voice level. "It means the room was not to be opened. It means more than that." The housekeeper's fingers closed upon a quill she did not lift. "It means that whatever lies within those walls is not furniture, not to him. You uncovered it. Yes, you looked at what was upon the stand. Yes, you touched it. With clean hands, ma'am. I did not read what was not mine to read." She heard the lie as it left her, and she heard also, beneath it, the smaller, truer thing, that she had read every note upon those pages with her eyes, if not her fingers, and would not now be able to unhear it. Mrs. Polgreen studied her for a long time. "You are a strange creature, Ackley." "Yes, ma'am." "You curtsy too well. You fold sheets as though someone once beat you for the corners. You handle a folio as though you have handled folios before, and when I set you down in this room to be scolded, you stand as though your spine were made of a piano wire." Frances did not answer. There was no answer that would not further undress her. The housekeeper looked back at the ledger. "His lordship will not be told of this." Frances's hand, without her leave, tightened upon her apron. "He will not be told," Mrs. Polgreen went on, "because I do not have it in me to be the one who tells him that a maid has walked upon that floor. You will not be dismissed. You will not go into that wing again. If Mrs. Ellery sends you, you will come to me first, and I will send another. Do you understand? I understand, Mrs. Polgreen. Say the rule. There shall be no music in this house, no song, no whistle, no humming at work, no instrument shall be touched, opened, or spoken of. This is by his lordship's standing order, and it is not to be questioned. Add the last clause, the one I gave you at your interview, and any maid who breaks it shall be turned out at the gate without character or wage. Good. Mrs. Polgreen closed the ledger. Go. Frances went. She walked the length of the servants' passage without feeling her feet. She reached the still room. She reached the scullery. She reached the small stone yard where she had been told to empty the bucket. She emptied it. She stood a moment with her hands upon the cold rim of the well, and she let her breath return to her by way of counting. 4 in, 4 held, 4 out, as her father had taught her before a performance when she was 9, and her knees had knocked. He must hear it and know I am not afraid. The phrase would not leave her. It sat under her ribs like a coin swallowed by mistake. She had not been in Ravensmere 3 weeks. She had been Frances Ackley 3 weeks. Before that, she had been Frances Calthorpe of Penryn, daughter of the late Mr. Edmund Calthorpe, whose small estate had been signed away by his brother Ambrose, while Edmund lay dying of his lungs. She had come north to Ravensmere because Mrs. Polgreen's advertisement in the Truro paper had asked for a girl of quiet habits, and because a house that banished music was, she had thought, a house that would not ask her to sit at a keyboard and betray herself. She had not counted on a Broadwood beneath 4 sheets. She had not counted on Mary Ann. That evening she took her supper of bread and cold mutton at the long trestle in the servants' hall, and did not lift her eyes. Tom Carbis, the stable boy, tried twice to make her laugh over some tale of a lame mare, and gave up, and gave her half his portion of pickled beet, because he had decided, in the way of 17-year-olds, that she was in need of feeding. She thanked him, and did not eat it. Above stairs, in the small book-room where he took his solitary dinner, the Earl of Garstang set down his fork before the plate was half cleared, and asked, without looking up, "Polgreen was here today?" The footman inclined. "She was, my lord, to discuss the Christmas stores." "Only the stores?" "So I understood, my lord." Fitzroy Ackland lifted his glass. He did not drink from it. He watched the candlelight move within the wine and thought, without knowing why, of the sound a metal bucket had made 3 weeks before in the flagged vestibule, a small, dull ring, as of a note struck by accident and then hastily silenced. He had walked past that sound. He had told himself he had walked past it. He had not. He had listened for it every day since. "Leave the wine," he said, "and send for Trevelyan in the morning. I have a letter I wish written." "Very good, my lord." The footman withdrew. The Earl sat alone with the small blue flame of the fire and the small red flame of the wine, and thought, though he would not have called it thinking, of a locked door at the top of a stair he had not climbed in a decade. In the servants' attic, under the low slope of the roof, Frances Calthorpe blew out her tallow and lay in the dark upon the narrow bed. Her right hand, hidden beneath the coarse blanket, rested upon her collarbone. Beneath the blanket, beneath the shift, beneath the ribbon, the garnet heart lay warm against her skin. Her left hand, without her leave, lay open upon the mattress, palm up, fingers curved as if a chord waited beneath them. 3 notes in the treble, an unfinished chord in the bass, a 5th that had not been given. She closed her eyes and, in the dark of a house that had banished music, she began, very quietly, to hear what came next. The note came first, before the fingers found the keys. It hung in the cold air of the west wing like a struck bell, thin and true, and then it broke apart into the second, and the third, and Mary Ann's unfinished nocturne began to move again after 10 years of silence. Frances did not open her eyes. She trusted the memory more than the room. The moon lay in long panes across the floor, and the Broadwood answered her the way old instruments answer someone who has grieved them properly. It rang. It hummed under the wood. The candle she had lit stood on the music desk with a hand cupped around it, and the wax slid down the brass in a slow tier. She played to the end of what the Countess had written, and then, because the page ended in the middle of a phrase, she played what she believed came next. Only 4 bars. A question, and its softest possible answer. She did not hear the wheels on the drive. She did not hear the front door. She heard, at last, boots on the stone. The nocturne stopped inside her fingers before it stopped in the air. Fitzroy Ackland stood in the doorway of the music room in his traveling greatcoat, snow on the shoulders, gloves still on. The scar along his jaw was livid in the candlelight. His gray eyes did not blink. Behind him, the corridor was black. Frances rose from the bench. Her chair scraped. She curtsied, deeply, the mesura of a servant who has understood exactly what she has done. He did not speak. He crossed the room. She had heard his stride in the halls for 3 weeks now, and had learned its measure, and this was not that stride. This was slower. He set his gloves on the top of the piano, one after the other, with a care that was worse than fury. Then he placed his right hand, the scarred one, on the polished wood beside her left shoulder, then his left, beside her right. She was caged between his arms and the keys. The candle showed her his throat, the high knot of the cravat, the tension there. "Continue," he said. Frances did not lift her head. "My lord." "Continue." "I have trespassed." "Yes." His voice was very low and very even. "Continue." She turned her head a fraction. She could see the burn scar close now, the way the skin caught the light differently, like poured wax, cooled unevenly. She could see, too, that his hand on the piano was trembling, not with rage, with something older. "If I stop," she said, "will you burn it?" His eyes moved to her at last. "If you stop," he said, "I will burn every instrument in the house before dawn. If you play, no one in Ravensmere is to know. Not Mrs. Polgreen, not the boy, not my brother when he next graces us. If a single soul hears of this, I will send you to Bodmin Gaol for theft of my late wife's papers, and you will not see daylight again. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, my lord." "Then play." She sat. She placed her hands upon the keys. He did not step back. He remained bent over her, both palms pressed to the piano, the greatcoat brushing her sleeve, and she felt the cold of the outside air still living on the wool. She began the nocturne again from the top. This time she did not close her eyes. She watched the candle. She played it whole, through the written pages, and when she reached Marianne's last bar, she paused only a heartbeat, and then went on into the 4 bars she had invented, and this time she added 2 more. She let the question hang. Behind her, above her, Fitzroy Ackland made no sound at all, only, at the end, when her hands lifted, she heard him exhale, once, as though a thing lodged in him for a decade had shifted by half an inch. He straightened. He picked up his gloves. He did not look at her again. "Tomorrow night," he said, "the same hour." He left the room. The door did not slam. It closed with the small, dry click of a lock being decided. Frances stayed at the piano until the candle guttered. Then she covered the broadwood in its 4 sheets, exactly as she had found them, folded so the creases fell in the same places. She carried her candle out through the servants' passage. She met no one. In her narrow bed under the eaves, she lay awake and listened to her own heart and thought, with a clarity she had not permitted herself in a year, "He did not hit me. He did not dismiss me. He asked me to continue." Deep down, she knew what that meant. She slept. The next night she went to the music room at the same hour. He was already there, seated in the armchair by the cold hearth, still in his day-coat, a decanter of claret untouched on the table beside him. He did not rise. He did not greet her. "Play," he said. She played. He did not once ask her name. By the end of the first week, they had a pattern. She came at 10. He was already installed. She removed the linen from the broadwood, tuned 2 stubborn strings by ear with a key he had left, without comment, on the music desk, and played. Sometimes the Countess's Nocturne, sometimes Clementi, sometimes a Scarlatti sonata she had learned as a child in her father's music room in Hampshire, before the canal shares her uncle had persuaded him into, had eaten the house and the harpsichord, and, in the end, her father himself. Fitzroy never spoke while she played. Occasionally, when she finished, he said, "Again." Occasionally, "The field." Once, and only once, "My wife's, please." By the second week he had begun to correct her. Slower. "The left hand is anticipating. That chord is not what she wrote. Look at the paper." Frances looked at the paper and saw that Marianne had indeed written a diminished 7th where memory had supplied a simpler minor, and she felt something turn in her chest that she chose not to name. "Yes, my lord." Again. By the third week, he began to ask questions. Where did you learn Scarlatti? From a governess. A governess in a house that could afford Scarlatti taught a scullery maid? I listened at the door, my lord. It was a precise, elegant lie, and he received it in silence, and did not press it. But the next night the decanter was gone from the table, and in its place lay a battered volume of Kramer's studies, with the spine cracked from long use. He said nothing about it. She said nothing about it. She opened it and played. By the fourth week, the pattern shifted again. He began, on certain nights, to speak of Marianne. Not to her, past her, into the fire that was never lit. She played this passage as though she were afraid of it, he said one night, of a field nocturne. She was afraid of most things. She hid it well. Another night. She could not bear the north wing after our sister was born. The nursery was there. She would not enter it, even before. Another. The house did not begin to rot until she was in the ground 11 months. Then it seemed to give up all at once. Doors that had closed for a century refused to close. The roof leaked in rooms it had never leaked in. A house knows. Frances did not answer these things. She understood that she was not being addressed. She was the instrument by which he was permitted, at last, to say them. But on the night he said, she never finished the last movement. She meant to. She was writing it the week the fever took her. Frances lifted her hands from the keys and, without turning, said, very quietly, I have written 4 bars after the end. There was a silence so long she thought he had left the room. Then his voice, from behind her, closer than she had known him to move, play them. She played the 4 bars she had invented, and then the 2 more she had added on the first night, and then, because she had been thinking of it all week, another 4 that resolved the phrase into the tonic Marianne had been circling. When she stopped, Fitzroy Ackland said, Write them down. My lord, there is ink in the desk. Write them down under her hand, in pencil, if you cannot bring yourself to use ink, but write them down. She wrote them down. He did not look at the page. He left the room while she was still ruling the staves. The next morning, Mrs. Polgreen caught her on the back stair. You look tired, Ackley. The chimney in my room smokes, ma'am. Does it? The housekeeper's astute brown eyes traveled up her, and down her, and up her again. There's a room in the east wing has a better flue. I'll have your box moved after dinner. Ma'am, please, do not trouble. It is no trouble. Mrs. Polgreen's hand rested for a moment on the ring of iron keys at her waist. His lordship rode to Truro yesterday. Alone. He has not ridden to Truro alone in 7 years. When he came back, he asked whether the piano tuner from Plymouth was still living. I did not know his lordship remembered there was a piano tuner from Plymouth. Frances kept her eyes on the tread of the stair. Mind the flue, girl, said Mrs. Polgreen, and she went on down. That afternoon, dusting the library, Frances heard hooves on the drive and, from the window, saw a small, spare man in a marten brown coat and gold-rimmed spectacles dismount without waiting for the groom. He carried a leather case pressed under one arm and did not glance at the facade of Ravensmere as he came in. She had never seen him before. She would not, then, have known to note the ink stains on his fingers, nor to guess that his name was Jeremiah Trevelyan. She heard, later, the murmur of 2 men's voices in the library that went on past the striking of 5 and 6 and 7. At 10 she went to the music room. Fitzroy was not there. She waited. She lit the candle. She uncovered the piano. At last the door opened and he came in, still holding a folded paper in his left hand. He set it on the mantel without reading it again. His face was closed, but the closure was different tonight. Not the closure of a mausoleum, but of a man who had decided something. Play the nocturne, he said. All of it, including your bars. She played. Halfway through, on the softest phrase, the fine gold chain at her throat slipped from beneath the coarse linen of her collar and lay for one moment across her collarbone, and the small garnet heart that hung upon it caught the candle and glowed, dark as a blood drop, against her skin. She felt the exact instant he saw it. She kept playing. She did not lift a hand to hide it. She had promised herself, when she came into service, that she would not lie beyond the surname, and the necklace was her mother's, and the mother was dead, and no scrubbing brush in Cornwall was going to take it from her throat. She played the nocturne to the end. She played her 12 bars. She let the last chord die. Fitzroy Ackland stood at the mantel with his hand upon the paper Trevelyan had left him, and he was looking at the garnet, and then at her face, and then at the garnet again, and Francis watched, through the polished lid of the Broadwood, the corner of his mouth move. It was not a smile as other men smiled. The scar tightened one side of it. It traveled only an inch, but it was, unmistakably, the first smile the master of Ravensmere Hall had permitted his face in 10 years. "Rundle and Bridge," he said. "Ludgate Hill. The garnet heart on a fine chain, made in a set of 3, if I remember. One for the mother, one for the elder daughter, one for the younger." Francis did not move. "My Aunt Eudora bought the elder daughters for a Christmas present," he said, "in the winter of 1808. She showed it to my wife. My wife admired it. The family was called Calthorpe." The candle guttered. "Miss Calthorpe," said Fitzroy Ackland very softly. "Which are you, the elder or the younger?" She rose from the bench. She curtsied, not the mazura of a servant this time, but the curtsy her governess had drilled into her at 9, spine long, chin level, one foot slid precisely behind the other. "The younger, my lord. Francis. And your uncle is Ambrose Calthorpe of Gray's Inn Square." "He is." "Who took your father's fortune into the Cornwall and Bodmin Canal scheme in 1814. "He did." "And who," said Fitzroy, and now his gray eyes were not cold at all, but very bright, "has been selling shares in a copper vein at Wheal Isolde upon my land, without my knowledge, for 18 months. Francis's breath caught. "I did not know that, my lord." "No, you would not have. He would not tell his own niece what he tells his marks in London." Fitzroy took the folded paper from the mantel and held it up between 2 fingers, as one might hold a summons. "Mr. Trevelyan is my solicitor. He has been hunting your uncle, in silence, since Michaelmas. Tonight he brought me the 8th affidavit. There will be a 9th by 12th night. There will be a warrant by Candlemas." He crossed to the piano. He set the paper, folded, upon the music desk beside the Kramer. "You will continue to be Francis Ackley in this house," he said, "until I say otherwise. You will continue to play at 10. You will continue to write down what Marianne did not live to write. In return, when the warrant is sworn, your name will not be in the papers. Your father's estate will be recovered, so far as any part of it may be, and you, Miss Calthorpe, will be under the protection of the Earl of Garstang. My lord? That is not a proposal. I did not think it was, my lord." His mouth moved again. The second smile in 10 years arrived within a quarter of an hour of the first. "Good," he said. "Play the 12 bars once more, slower. The last chord is not what she would have written. I will tell you what she would have written." Francis sat. She played. He stood behind her, at the corner of the Broadwood, and when she reached the final chord, he said, "F sharp in the tenor, not F natural." She hated a Picardy third. She said it was a lie the composer told to be liked. Francis lifted her hand. She rewrote the chord and struck it. It rang truer. She played the whole nocturne again, with his correction, and the room, which had been a mausoleum for a decade, became, for that quarter hour, a music room again. When she stopped, he did not tell her to go. He said instead, without looking at her, "There will be a ball at Penhallow Court at 12th night. My aunt writes to command my attendance. I have not accepted an invitation in 9 years. I shall accept this one. Yes, my lord. You will come with me." Francis's fingers pressed flat upon the keys, silent. "My lord, I am a housemaid. On the night of the ball you will not be." He turned at last and looked at her fully. The candle was almost gone. "On the night of the ball you will be Miss Calthorpe in mazarine blue, and there will be sapphires. Trevelyan will bring the last of the affidavits to the ballroom in his coat. Your uncle will be there. My brother will be there. The Bishop of Truro will be there. All of Cornwall will be there. And I intend, Miss Calthorpe, that all of Cornwall shall see who has been playing my wife's piano." He picked up his gloves. At the door, without turning. "Cover the instrument, take the paper Trevelyan left, read it in your room, burn it in the grate before dawn." He was gone. Francis did not move for a long time. Then she took the folded paper from the music desk and slid it beneath the garnet heart against her skin, and covered the Broadwood in its 4 linen sheets, folding the creases where she had folded them every night for 4 weeks. At the door of the music room, she looked back once. The candle had just died. In the moonlight, the piano was a black shape, and above it, on the mantel, a second shape she had not seen him leave, a small, plain wooden box. She crossed to it. She lifted the lid. Inside, on faded blue velvet, lay a single sapphire earring. It had been made in a set. The other, she understood at once, was elsewhere in the house, waiting. Frances closed the box. She carried her candle stub to the door, and, in the corridor, for the first time since her father had died, she permitted herself to walk without stooping. Behind her, in the dark music room, the Broadwood settled in its sheets like a living thing that had, at last, been remembered. 6 weeks passed the way water passes over a stone, quietly, and with a great deal of shaping done in the dark. By the end of the first fortnight, Frances no longer flinched when the door of the music room opened behind her. She had learned the exact weight of the Earl's step on the parquet, the small hesitation he made before he crossed the threshold, as though each time he half expected the room to have vanished in his absence. It never had. The Broadwood waited under its raised lid. The candles, 4 of them, waited in their brass sticks. She waited on the bench, in her feuille morte wool, with her hands folded in her lap and her back too straight for a housemaid. He came, most nights, at 10:15. He did not sit. He stood at the far end of the room, in the shadow beyond the second candelabrum, one gloved hand resting on the marble mantel, and the other, the scarred one, held loose at his side. He asked for nothing by name. He simply inclined his head, once, and she began. She played the nocturne, always, first. It was the only piece he had ever asked twice for, and she understood, without being told, that the request had become a kind of key that unlocked the rest of the evening. After the nocturne, she played what she chose. A Haydn andante, a field, a Scottish air her father had loved. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the sealed windows, she played nothing at all for a long minute and let the room breathe, and he did not move to correct the silence. They did not speak of her name. They did not speak of his hand. They spoke, when they spoke, of pedalwork, of the softness of the middle E, of whether the room's damp had begun to soften the hammers again. They spoke like two musicians who had met at a country house and found, against all likelihood, that they had been trained in the same tradition. It was the safest and most dangerous conversation Frances had ever had. Mrs. Polgreen knew. Frances understood this on the 17th night, when she came down at 6 for the morning fires and found her caddy already lit, her rag already damp, and a small pot of beeswax standing by the door of the music room with a folded note under it, in the housekeeper's tight, upright hand. 2 words, "Mind the pedals." Frances read the note twice, folded it back, and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. She did not thank Mrs. Polgreen, because Mrs. Polgreen would have refused the thanks. She only nodded, once, when they passed each other on the back stair, and Mrs. Polgreen nodded back, once, and adjusted the ring of iron keys at her waist as though nothing had passed between them at all. Tom Carbis knew too, in his own way. He began, without instruction, to walk the great mastiff around the west lawn at 10:30 each night, which took him and the dog well clear of the music-room windows and any light that might have been seen through the shutters. When Frances passed him in the yard at dawn, he touched the brim of his cap and looked at his boots and said, "Morning, miss," in a voice so carefully neutral that she nearly laughed. She did not laugh. She only said, "Morning, Tom," and went in to lay the parlor fire. The Earl did not smile, not yet. But on the 23rd night, when she finished the nocturne and let her hands fall into her lap, he crossed the room. He did not stop at his usual place by the second candelabrum. He came to the piano itself and stood at the curve of it and set his gloved right hand on the polished lid and looked down at her keyboard as though he had forgotten what such a thing was for. "There is a phrase," he said, "in the 3rd bar of the 2nd page. My wife could never resolve it. She wrote 3 endings. She burned 2. His eyes moved to hers. "Do you know why she could not finish it?" Frances thought before she answered. "Because the phrase does not want to end." He was silent a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Yes." He did not tell her to try. She tried. She played the phrase as Marianne had written it, and then she played it again, and on the 4th pass she let her left hand fall a tone lower than the manuscript demanded, and the phrase turned, and did not close, and turned again, and rested at last on a chord that was not a resolution, but a question held very gently in the air. The Earl did not move. When she looked up, his gloved hand had left the piano's lid and closed around the edge of the instrument's frame, hard enough that the leather creaked. "Do not play that again tonight," he said. His voice had gone rough. "I am not equal to it." She rose. She curtsied. She left the room. In the corridor, she pressed her palm flat against the cool plaster of the wall and stood there until her breath was even again, and then she went upstairs to her narrow bed under the eaves and did not sleep until the sky had turned gray. On the 31st night, he saw the garnet. She had been careless. She had leaned forward too far to reach the highest run of a scherzo, and her fichu had slipped, and the little heart of rondelle garnet, on its length of black ribbon, had swung free of her corset and struck the ivory of middle C with a small, distinct chime. She caught it back at once. She tucked it away. She kept playing. She did not miss a note. But when she glanced up, the Earl was no longer standing at the mantel. He was 3 paces closer, and his face, half in candlelight and half in shadow, had gone still in a way she had not seen before. Not the stillness of anger, not the stillness of grief. It was the stillness of a man who has just seen, on a table in front of him, a piece of a puzzle he had long since stopped hoping to solve. He said nothing. He let her finish. He waited while she gathered her music, and closed the fallboard, and rose. He stopped her at the door with a word. "Miss." She turned. "That pendant." His voice was even. "It is a rondelle piece. 15 years old at least. The pattern was discontinued. There were 9 of them made." Frances did not answer. Her hand, without her permission, had gone to her throat. "I stood beside your father," the Earl said, "at Almack's, the season it was struck. He ordered it for a niece of 6. He described her hair to Mr. Rundell, and Mr. Rundell laughed, and said garnet was too warm for a Calthorpe, and your father said that a Calthorpe could stand a little warmth. I remember it because I had never before heard your father laugh in company." The corridor beyond the open door was black. The candles guttered. "Miss Calthorpe," he said. She did not move. "I will not require an answer tonight," he said. "I will not require an answer tomorrow. I would ask only that you do not leave this house before I have spoken to you again." She curtsied. She could not, at that moment, have spoken if her life had depended upon it. She left the room. She heard, behind her, the sound of a man drawing in one long breath and letting it out slowly, as though he had been holding it for 10 years. She did not sleep at all. At dawn, she was in the still room, plucking a brace of pheasants for Mrs. Polgreen, when the housekeeper came in with her keys and her broad, watchful face, and set a cup of black tea beside Frances's hand. "His lordship rode for Truro at 4 this morning," Mrs. Polgreen said. "In the dark, without his groom. He left instruction that you are not to be given notice, not to be turned off, and not to be sent on any errand beyond the park gates until his return. He left that instruction with me, which means it is now a matter of the household and not a matter of your understanding with him. Do you follow, Frances Ackley?" Frances lifted her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Polgreen." "Good," said Mrs. Polgreen. She did not smile. She did not soften. She only picked up the second pheasant and began to pluck it herself, her red hands quick and sure. After a long moment, she added, without looking up, "Whatever your true name is, you may keep it to yourself another week. I am too old to learn a new one twice." Frances lowered her face over the bird in her lap and let one tear fall into the feathers before she caught the rest. The Earl was gone 4 days. He came back on horseback in a thin sleet at dusk, and did not stop in the hall, and did not call for supper. He went directly to the library and shut the door. Frances, laying the fire in the small drawing room across the corridor, heard the murmur of a second voice within, and understood, without needing to be told, that Mr. Trevelyan had ridden back with him from Truro, and that Mr. Trevelyan had been carrying a satchel. She did not go up that night at 10. She waited on her narrow bed, fully dressed, with her hands folded on her lap, and listened for the step on the stair. It did not come. At midnight, Mrs. Polgreen tapped once at her door. "The library," said Mrs. Polgreen. "Bring no candle. He has enough of them." Frances went down in her stockinged feet, carrying her boots in her hand, and stopped only to put them on at the foot of the stairs. The library door stood open a hand's breadth. She knocked. The Earl's voice from within said only, "Come." Mr. Trevelyan was standing at the long walnut table. His inkwell was uncorked. 3 ledgers, bound in different colors of leather, lay open before him, and a sheaf of loose papers had been weighted at each corner with a paperweight of Cornish serpentine. He looked up at her over his round gold spectacles and inclined his head with a courtesy that no solicitor in England had ever before offered to a maid in a foil mort gown. "Miss Calthorpe," he said. "Not Miss Ackley. Miss Calthorpe." The Earl was standing by the fire. He had removed his coat. His cravat was loosened. His scarred right hand was bare, resting on the mantel, in full light, and he did not move to hide it when she entered. "Sit," he said. Frances sat. He did not sit. He walked once the length of the room, and back, and stopped in front of her, and said, "Your uncle Ambrose Calthorpe is defrauding the shareholders of the Bodmin Union Canal Company. He has been doing so for 4 years. He forges signatures. He invents surveyors. He has taken, at my best estimate, £17,000 of my tenants' subscription money, and I have been watching him do it since Michaelmas of the year before you came into this house. I began watching him because he is the man who ruined your father. I continued watching him because I wished, quietly, to see him hanged." He drew one breath. "I did not know, until 3 nights ago, that his niece was scrubbing the floor of my hall." Frances did not speak. She could not. Her hands, in her lap, had gone quite cold. "Mr. Trevelyan," the Earl said, "has this evening laid before me proof sufficient to break your uncle in the Court of Chancery, ruin him at his club, and see him bound over for criminal prosecution before the spring assizes. My brother Silas, who is his cousin by marriage and his creature by inclination, will fall with him. I mean to see them both fall in public, in one evening, before every consequential person in Cornwall. I mean the evening to be Lady Penhallow's 12th night ball, 3 weeks hence, and I mean you to be present at that ball, in silk and in sapphires, on my arm, as my acknowledged guest." The fire cracked. "I do not ask this of you as your master," the Earl said. His voice had gone very low. "I have no rights over you as a master, and I have never wished any. I ask it of you as the only person in this house who has understood, from the first note she played in this room, what my wife was trying to say in a phrase she could not finish. I ask it of you as Frances Calthorpe. I ask it knowing that if you refuse, I will still ruin them, and I will still see you set free of them, and I will send you where you wish to go, with a settlement in your own name, and I will never trouble you again." He was silent. "I ask it," he said, "because I would rather not do it without you." She looked up at him. She looked, for the first time, full at his face in candlelight, and at the burn that climbed the line of his jaw, and at the gray of his eyes that had, all these nights, been trying to be colder than they were. "My lord," she said. Her voice did not shake, and she was faintly astonished by that. "I have not worn silk in 5 years," she said. "I have not danced in 7. I do not know if I remember how to enter a room on any man's arm. But I know how to finish a phrase your wife could not finish. And I know my uncle, and I know what he did to my father, and I will be at Lady Penhallow's ball, in whatever color you wish, and I will not falter." Mr. Trevelyan, at the table, set down his pen very carefully, as though afraid the small sound of it might break something in the room. The Earl said nothing. He lifted his scarred right hand from the mantel, slowly, and held it a moment in the air between them, as though he did not quite know what he meant to do with it. Then he lowered it, and he laid it, palm down, on the walnut of the table, in full light, and left it there. "Then it is decided," he said. He turned to Mr. Trevelyan. "Write to Rundell in the morning, the Mazarine parure, the full set, under my name, not hers, and write to Madame Duval in Bath, about the gown, blue, not white. She is not a debutante." "My lord," said Mr. Trevelyan, already writing. The Earl looked back at Frances. He did not smile, even now, but something in the line of his mouth had eased, in a way she suspected no one in that house had seen for a decade. "You may go up, Miss Calthorpe," he said. "You are dismissed from the scullery, from the hearths, and from the corridor floors, from this hour. Mrs. Polgreen will find you a room that is not under the eaves. You will not answer a bell in this house again." Frances rose. She curtsied. She turned to the door. At the threshold she stopped, and, without turning back, she said, "I shall still come down at 10:15, my lord." There is a phrase we have not finished." She did not wait for his answer. She walked, in her stockinged feet, along the black corridor toward the back stair, and behind her, in the library, she heard the small, unmistakable sound of a man who had not laughed in 10 years drawing breath, once, sharply, through his teeth, as though something long clenched inside him had, at last, come loose. Above the great hall, the clock struck 1. Somewhere in Truro, a solicitor's junior clerk was already sealing letters that would, within the week, cross a coach road toward London, toward Rundell and Bridge, toward Madame Duval in Bath, and toward a certain Ambrose Calthorpe of Bristol, who had, without yet knowing it, exactly 43 days left in which to be a gentleman. And in a mean parsonage on the edge of Bodmin Moor, the Reverend Silas Ackland, who had been paid a small quarterly sum for 6 years to send his brother's whereabouts and his brother's letters and his brother's silences to his cousin Ambrose, had just, that evening, opened a new letter of his own. It was from the Bishop of Exeter. It invited him most warmly to attend Lady Penhallow's 12th night ball at Penhallow Court on the 6th of January as a personal guest of the Earl of Garstang. Silas read the letter twice. Then he smiled, the professional smile he kept for weddings, and he set the letter on his desk, and he wrote at once to Ambrose Calthorpe to tell him that the fool of a brother had, at last, cracked, and that the moment they had been waiting for had, most conveniently, arrived. He did not know that the trap in the room was not his. He would not know it for 43 days. The carriage wheels came before the bell did. Frances heard them first from the music room, where she was correcting a phrase on the last page of Marianne's nocturne. The Broadwood held its warmth from her hands. She lifted her head. 2 carriages, she counted by the rhythm on the gravel, not 1, and the second was heavier than any post-chaise. Mrs. Polgreen appeared at the door with her keys already in her fist. "The Reverend," the housekeeper said, "and Mr. Calthorpe of Truro, together." Frances set the pencil down. Her fingers did not shake. That was the thing that later frightened her most, when she considered it. Her fingers did not shake. "Does the Earl expect them?" "The Earl is in Bodmin until Thursday, miss," as they seemed to know. The pencil rolled a half-inch and stopped against the music rack. Frances stood. "Then I shall receive them in the yellow parlor," she said, and heard the wrongness of it a moment after. She was still a housemaid in the household books. She had no yellow parlor to grant. Mrs. Polgreen did not correct her. That, too, was a small collapse. By the time Frances reached the head of the stairs, Silas Ackland was already in the hall. He had removed his hat with the neat professional grief of a man who has come to bury someone. Ambrose Calthorpe stood behind him, one gloved hand on the ivory head of his cane, breathing through his mouth. The Porto had come with him into the vestibule. She smelled it before she saw the flush of his nose. She had not seen her uncle for 4 years. He looked at her once. He did not know her. That was the first mercy of the afternoon and the last. Silas smiled up at her. "Miss Ackley, is it? Come down. My brother has left a rather awkward business behind him, and we should like it settled before he returns." She came down. She kept one hand on the banister, not for balance, but because a musician's hand knows how to look at ease when it is not. In the library, they had already opened a ledger on the Earl's desk. Not the household ledger, which was green. This was a slim book, bound in brown calf, its edges too fresh. Silas had laid it precisely at the center of the blotter, as if to be sure the winter light struck the page. "Sit, Miss Ackley." "I shall stand." "As you like." Ambrose settled into the Earl's own chair without asking. The wood creaked under him. He pushed the ledger toward her with 2 fingers. "Read the 3rd entry." She did not touch it. She read from where she stood. £12, 4 shillings, against her name in a hand she had never used. A pair of pearl earrings from the late Countess's dressing case. Below that, a set of silver forks. Below that, a locket of enamel. "I have never entered this room before today," she said quietly. "Then how curious," Silas murmured, "that the earrings should be under the mattress of the small chamber above the still room." The wall behind her seemed to move a fraction closer. She kept her breathing at the tempo of an adagio, 4 beats to the bar. "That is not my chamber. It is now, Miss Ackley. Mrs. Polgreen assigned it to you the 22nd of November. I have her word." He inclined his head toward the door, where the housekeeper stood with her face as unreadable as an old psalter. And the constable of Bodmin has already been sent for, regrettably. Ambrose let out a small wet laugh and drank from a glass he had somehow already been given. Girl looks like her mother, he said, and then, seeing that Silas did not turn, no matter, get on with it. Francis heard the name he had not quite said. Her mother, Mary Calthorpe, dead 9 years, whose sheet music had been sold to a broker in Falmouth to pay her uncle's Bristol debt. She looked at Ambrose fully for the first time. He had eaten well since then. She let him see her looking. He did not know her still. He did not know her. Silas stepped between them, courteous as a curate at a christening. "There is a further difficulty," he said. "My brother, as the household must by now have observed, has not been himself since November. A woman at the pianoforte, in this house of all houses, sittings by candlelight. The physician at Truro will testify that the Earl's nerves have been fragile since the fire, a weakness we have long feared." "His nerves," Francis repeated. The word felt like a stone under the tongue. "His grief," Silas corrected gently. "It has been protracted. It has now become, one might say, romantical. A predator in a housemaid's cap is a well-known figure in the annals of country houses. My duty to the family name compels me." He turned a page of the brown ledger. In a smaller hand at the bottom, someone had written, "Influence upon Fitzroy Ackland, Earl of Garstang, to the alteration of settled dispositions." She read it twice. The second time, she understood what they had come for. Not the earrings, not the forks. The will. "You mean to have him declared unfit?" Silas placed his palm flat over the entry, as if to shield her from reading further. "I mean to have him protected," he said. "From himself, from you." Ambrose set his glass down hard. "Enough talking. Constables at the gate." He was. She heard the second set of hooves come to a stop, and a heavier boot on the flagstones. Mrs. Polgreen glanced once at Francis. Something moved in her face. Not pity, something older. Then it was gone. "Escort Miss Ackley to her chamber," Silas said. "The constable will remain in the hall. Nothing indecorous. This is a matter for the magistrates, not the parish. We shall await my brother's return." "When is he expected?" Francis asked. "Sooner than he supposes," Silas said. "I have sent word." He turned the smile on her one last time, the smile of a man who has always known which pew he would inherit. She did not give him one back. She walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped. "May I bring one thing from the music room?" "You may not." "A sheet of paper, nothing more." Silas hesitated. The hesitation was itself a small victory, though she did not yet know for what. "A sheet of paper," he allowed. "Mrs. Polgreen will observe." In the music room, the winter light had shifted a quarter turn. The broadwood stood open. Marianne's nocturne lay where Francis had left it, the pencil against the rack. Mrs. Polgreen stood in the doorway, with her keys, held still against her apron, so they would not sing. Francis took a clean sheet from the folio. She did not take the nocturne. She sat, and in a hand steady as any copyist's, she wrote out 4 bars from memory. Not Marianne's. Her own. A phrase she had never played in this house. A phrase her mother had once corrected at a schoolroom keyboard in Somerset. She folded the sheet twice. She wrote no name on it. She held it out. "To Mr. Trevelyan of Truro," she said, "by your first honest hand." Mrs. Polgreen did not move. "I am watched, miss." "You are trusted, Mrs. Polgreen." "That is a heavier thing." For a long moment the housekeeper looked at her. The verruga at her temple caught the light. Then, without speaking, she took the folded sheet and slid it inside the front of her bodice, beneath the black bombazine, and turned, as if nothing had passed. "To your chamber, Miss Ackley." They climbed the back stairs. The constable was a broad man from Bodmin whose coat still smelled of the road. He did not look at her. He set himself at the foot of the stairs like a piece of furniture. The chamber above the still room was narrow, with a single window seated deep in the stone. The bed had been remade since morning. Under the mattress, she did not doubt, the earrings lay exactly where they had been placed. The key turned from the outside. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not weep. She counted, because counting was what her hands had always done when the world came apart. 4 beats. 4 again. She thought of the Earl's hand as she had last seen it, ungloved on the keyboard beside hers, the scars catching the candlelight like a script in an unread language. She thought, "He does not know." Then she thought, more slowly, he will come back, and he will believe them. That was the thought that undid her, because it was reasonable. He had believed the world capable of taking everything from him already. Why should he not believe it capable of one theft more? She had entered his house under a false name. She had lied to him about her family. She had touched his mother's piano without leave. Every fact Silas would lay before him was true, and every truth would arrive in the wrong order. She lay back against the pillow and watched the square of gray light on the ceiling. The afternoon passed. She heard voices in the yard. She heard a boy sent running. She heard, once, Silas laugh, a small, clean laugh, like a coin dropped on a silver tray. She heard Ambrose call for more Porto and be refused, and heard him call again and be answered. At dusk a tray came, bread, cheese, a mug of small beer. The maid who brought it was a girl from the village she did not know. The girl did not meet her eyes. The key turned again. Frances did not touch the bread. She stood at the window. The window was seated too deep to open more than a hand's width, and the drop below was to flagstone. She had already looked. She was not a girl of ropes and knotted sheets. She was a musician, and musicians, when the instrument is taken from them, learn to compose in silence. She composed. She sat again on the edge of the bed and closed her eyes and set the case in order like a fugue. Silas would produce the ledger. Ambrose would produce a witness, likely the Falmouth broker who had bought her mother's music and could be bought again. The physician at Truro would speak of nerves. The constable would speak of earrings, and the Earl would return from Bodmin already told, already prepared, and would be asked at the door of his own house whether he wished to press charges against his housemaid, or whether he wished to be examined himself. He would choose. He would have to choose in an hour, and he would not have her voice to answer with, because they had taken her voice from her by locking a door. She opened her eyes. She had one hand still. Mrs. Polgreen, 4 bars of music, in a language only one man in Cornwall would read, because he had once collected her father's compositions before her father was ruined. Jeremiah Trevelyan of Truro, who kept a cornelian seal on his watch chain and inked his fingers to the second knuckle, and had once, at a country assembly 10 years ago, complimented a schoolgirl on her fingering of a Clementi sonata. Whether he would remember, whether Mrs. Polgreen would risk her place, whether the road to Truro was passable in December, she could not know. She had done the one thing she could do. That would have to be enough for the counting. Night came without a lamp. She sat in the dark. Somewhere below, a door closed with the particular finality of a bolt shot from the inside. She thought she heard, very far off, a horse on the northern road, and then thought she had imagined it. At the 3rd hour after midnight, a step came in the corridor. Light showed under the door, then withdrew. The key did not turn. A folded paper slid across the boards and stopped against her foot. She did not move. She waited until the step went away. She waited longer. Then she picked up the paper and carried it to the window and read it by the moon. 3 lines, in the housekeeper's careful hand. The Reverend has sent to Bodmin. His lordship is not there. He has been in Truro these 3 days, with Mr. T. He knows. She read it twice. She read it a 3rd time and let it fall. He knew. He had been in Truro. He had not gone north for hunting. He had gone to Trevelyan to do whatever men of his rank did quietly, in offices lined with green baize, when they intended to bring another man down. He had not abandoned her. He had, in his own way, been preparing. For 1 full minute the relief was so complete that she had to sit down. Then, cold and clear as a struck note, the second understanding came. He knew, and he had not warned her. He had not sent word. He had left her in this house while he moved his pieces, because he had wanted the trap to close on Silas and Ambrose with her still inside it. She was his witness in situ. She was his fact upon the ground. He had used her as one uses a lure, and he had done it because he trusted her to survive it, and he had done it without asking whether she wished to be trusted with that. She was still, in his ledger, the girl at the piano who would keep playing until told to stop. She folded the housekeeper's note and slid it inside the coral heart at her breast, where the fine chain still held. The fluttering it made against her ribs was faint and steady, and not her own heart's. Very well. She went to the door and knelt and put her mouth to the crack at the hinge and spoke, so softly that only the wood could hear. Mrs. Polgreen, if you can, tell his lordship this. I am not a transaction. She sat back on her heels. She waited to hear whether any step returned. None did. She rose and lay on the bed fully dressed, boots and all, and folded her hands upon the coral heart, and set her breathing to 4 beats. She would sleep, because a musician who cannot sleep before a performance is no musician at all. She would sleep, and in the morning she would find that Silas had produced the physician, and Ambrose had produced the broker, and the Earl had returned, and that the trap that closed would close on more than one throat at once. She would sleep, and she would not weep, and she would not compose an answer to him in her head. He would have to earn her answer in daylight, in company, in the presence of witnesses, at an instrument of his choosing, and he would have to do it in a room where she could stand up and walk out if he failed. She closed her eyes. Below her window, on the flagstones, the constable of Bodmin shifted from foot to foot and blew on his fingers, and did not know that he was standing on the edge of a bar line, and that when the downbeat came, it would not be for him to strike. She slept. She did not know that Silas, at that same hour, was writing a letter to the Bishop of Exeter, in a hand as neat as Scripture, requesting an urgent private interview at Penhallow Court on the night of the 21st, at which certain painful family matters might be laid at last to rest. She did not know that Lady Eudora Penhallow, at that same hour, was reading a shorter letter, in a different hand, and setting 3 cards aside for names she had not intended to invite. She did not know that a mazarine blue silk had already been unpacked in a chamber at Truro, from a trunk labeled only with the initials of a woman 10 years dead. She slept, and above her the moon crossed the window and left it dark, and in the dark the coral heart at her throat kept its own small metronome against the paper folded beside it. 4 beats, and 4 again, and 4 again, until morning. The key turned in the lock at 6 in the morning, and Frances was already dressed. She had slept in the grey wool, boots laced, coral heart tucked out of sight, and when Mrs. Polgreen pushed the door open, the older woman only stepped aside and did not meet her eye. "His lordship requests you in the library." Requests? His word, not mine. Frances passed her without a curtsy. 3 days locked in that room had taught her the exact length of her own patience, and the exact weight of a name she had chosen to hide behind. She would not curtsy again in this house until she knew what she was standing on. Fitzroy stood at the long window, back to the door, the scarred hand ungloved on the sill. Trevelyan sat at the table with 3 portfolios opened before him like fanned playing cards. A 4th man in a violet stock she did not recognize rose and bowed. "Miss Calthorpe," Fitzroy said, and the name struck the room like a chord long held and only now permitted to sound. "Sit. I have been sitting for 3 days. Then stand. I will not detain you long." He turned. The cicatrice down his jaw looked, in the low sun, like a river seen from a great height. "I owe you an accounting. You will receive it before anything else is asked of you." Trevelyan cleared his throat and touched the first portfolio. "Miss Calthorpe, 48 hours ago your uncle Ambrose Calthorpe was arrested in Truro on a warrant sworn out by this office. The charge is fraud upon the Bodmin Canal subscription and forgery of your father's late signature upon 2 deeds of assignment. He is presently in the sponging house, awaiting removal to Bodmin Jail." Frances found the back of the nearest chair with one hand and did not sit. "The Reverend Silas Ackland," Trevelyan continued, "was informed last night of a citation from the Bishop of Exeter, which the bishop himself will serve this evening at Penhallow Court. He is suspended ad interim from all clerical function pending trial in the consistorial court on a charge of compounding a felony." "Tonight," Frances said. "At the ball." "At the ball," said Fitzroy. "You planned this." "I planned the arrests. Lady Eudora planned the ball. The 2 dates were made to lie down together." She looked from him to the ungloved hand on the sill and back. "And me. You," he said, "were to have been told 2 nights ago. Silas was quicker than I permitted him to be. He walked into this house with a ledger and a magistrate at the same hour I was in Bodmin taking the sworn statement of the canal's chief engineer. When I returned you were locked in your room and Mrs. Polgreen was weeping in the still room. I have not slept since. You might have sent word." "I sent Trevelyan." Mrs. Polgreen turned him at the door on Silas's orders. "I have dismissed her authority in this house as of this morning. She keeps her place because she wept, and because weeping is the only apology she has ever known how to make." Frances's fingers were white on the chair. "I need," Fitzroy said, more quietly, "to know one thing before we go further. whether you would rather be put into a carriage now, with letters of credit upon Coots and my sister-in-law's house in Bath as your destination, or whether you would come tonight to Penhallow Court with me and be seen. Seen as what? As yourself, as Francis Calthorpe, on my arm. The man in the violet stock coughed politely and did not look up. You are asking, she said, whether I will forgive you before breakfast. I am asking whether you will let me finish what you began the night you took the sheet off the piano. Forgiveness we may sort out at leisure. Justice will not wait past 10 o'clock. She let go of the chair. I will come. By 11 the west chamber above the yellow salon had become a workshop. 2 ladies' maids from Penhallow Court had been sent over at Lady Eudora's command, with the hairdresser Marchand from Truro following in a gig. The mazarine blue lay across the bed like a folded piece of night sky. Frances stood in her shift while they measured her against the seams, and did not flinch when the coral heart was lifted from her throat and set aside. It goes back on, she said. Under the sapphires, miss? Under everything. At 3 the parceur came out of its case. The tiara alone drew light from the corners of the room. She looked at herself in the pier glass, at the girl with the pianist's hands and the too straight back, and saw for the first time the outline of the woman her mother had meant her to be, and had not lived to see. Fitzroy came to the door once, only, and did not enter. Trevelyan is in the carriage. I know. The bishop rides with Lady Eudora. Silas has been told to attend. He does not yet know the citation is in the bishop's pocket. Good. He hesitated. Frances. She turned. It was the first time he had used her name. If at any point tonight you wish to leave, you will lift your left hand to the sapphires at your throat. I will see it. We will go, no question asked. I will not lift my hand. I know, he said. I still had to tell you where it was. Penhallow Court blazed. 300 wax candles in the long gallery, the orangery thrown open, a quartet of strings tuning in the alcove, the black and white marble of the entrance hall polished to a skating floor. Carriages set down every half minute along the sweep. Lady Eudora stood at the head of the stairs in Esterhazy grey and greeted each guest with the exact measure of warmth their rank required, and no more. The Earl of Garstang was announced at 9:15. He came in without his gloves. That alone silenced the near end of the gallery. The scarred right hand hung uncovered at his side, the signet ring catching candlelight, and every eye in the room went first to the hand and then, inevitably, to the woman on his left arm. She wore mazarine blue and the Ackland sapphires and the composure of a girl who had once scrubbed the floor beneath their feet. Lady Eudora Penhallow, Fitzroy said, may I present Miss Frances Calthorpe, of Calthorpe Priors, Wiltshire, lately in my household. Lady Eudora's eyes traveled from the tiara to the coral ribbon just visible at the neckline and back. She inclined her head 1 degree deeper than protocol required. Miss Calthorpe, you are very welcome in my house. Your ladyship is kind. I am seldom kind, I am occasionally accurate. Go and be looked at. They went and were looked at. A path opened for them along the gallery, as though the parquet had been cleared by a footman. Silas Ackland saw them from the far end, and the professional smile arrived on his mouth a half-beat late. Beside him, Ambrose Calthorpe was not present. Silas had been told his uncle by marriage was detained upon canal business in Truro. He had believed it at 3 o'clock. He was ceasing to believe it now. The Bishop of Exeter emerged from the card-room with Trevelyan at his elbow. Reverend Ackland, said the bishop, and his voice was mild and carried. A word. Silas turned. The smile held. Your Grace. Not here. The library. Mr. Trevelyan will accompany us. Lady Eudora has been so good as to lend us the room. I am, of course, at your Grace's disposal. Might I ask the occasion? You may ask in the library. Silas's eyes went past the bishop and found his brother, standing beside Frances at the mouth of the gallery, the ungloved hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Something in his face gave way at last, not into fear, but into the small, hard calculation of a man who has always believed he could talk his way out of any room he had been walked into. He bowed. Your Grace. They went. The gallery watched them go and pretended not to. Fitzroy bent his head to Frances. Trevelyan will speak in 10 minutes. The bishop will not permit him to speak sooner. It gives Silas time to lie, and the bishop wishes to hear him lie. And Ambrose. Ambrose is in Truro. He will be in Bodmin by morning. 2 of his subscribers are here tonight. They will learn of the arrest before they learn of the supper. You have arranged even the order of the news. I have arranged nothing that was not already true. I have only chosen the room. The quartet began a country dance. He did not ask her to stand up. She was grateful. She did not think her knees would hold her yet. 10 minutes passed. Trevelyan reappeared at the library door and caught Lady Eudora's eye. Lady Eudora lifted one finger to her majordomo, and the majordomo struck the parquet twice with his staff, and the quartet went still on a half-bar. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," said Lady Eudora, from 3 steps up the gallery stair. "Before we go in to supper, Mr. Trevelyan, solicitor to the Earl of Garstang, begs the courtesy of your attention upon a matter of Cornish concern. I have granted it. You will oblige me by hearing him." Trevelyan came forward with 3 papers. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "On the 14th of October last," he said, "a deed of assignment purporting to convey the mineral rights of Wheal Mary Ann, in the parish of Bodmin, from the late Henry Calthorpe of Calthorpe Priors to one Ambrose Calthorpe, his brother, was lodged at the Stannery Court. The signature of Henry Calthorpe upon that deed has this week been sworn, by 2 independent hands, including that of the late gentleman's own attorney in Salisbury, to be a forgery. Mr. Ambrose Calthorpe was taken into custody in Truro on Tuesday last, upon a warrant of the Bodmin bench." A movement, small, along the walls. 2 gentlemen near the orangery went very still. Further, the subscription for the Bodmin Canal extension, of which Mr. Ambrose Calthorpe was treasurer, is short by £9,400. Of that sum, 3,200 was drawn upon the account of the Reverend Silas Ackland of this county in the month of August. The Reverend Silas Ackland has this evening been served, by His Grace the Bishop of Exeter, with a citation of suspension pending trial upon the charge of compounding the said felony. He folded the paper. "His Lordship the Earl of Garstang has instructed me to add that all moneys wrongfully drawn upon the estate of the late Henry Calthorpe, together with their interest, will be restored this quarter to his sole surviving heir, Miss Frances Calthorpe, whom you see beside him. That is all I am charged to say. I thank your ladyship. I thank the company." He stepped back. The gallery did not applaud. It did something quieter and more damaging. It turned in a single slow motion away from the library door. Silas came out a moment later, without the bishop. He walked the length of the gallery with the professional smile still in place, and no one met his eyes. At the door he paused, looked once at his brother, and did not find what he was looking for. He went out into the sweep, and a footman closed the door behind him with the exact indifference reserved for a guest who is not expected to return. Fitzroy did not watch him go. He was looking at Francis. "It is done," he said. "It is done. Then there is one thing more, and it is not justice. It is only mine to ask." He turned to face her fully in the middle of the gallery, in the sight of everyone whose sight had ever mattered to the Ackland name, and lifted the scarred right hand between them, palm open, so that the ridged and shining skin was visible from the wrist to the tips of the fingers. A small sound went through the room and was suppressed. "You have seen this hand," he said, low, for her only, and for the entire company at once. "You saw it before you knew whose it was. You put your own beside it on a keyboard in the dark. I have not asked a woman anything in 10 years. I am asking you now. Finish the nocturne, my mother's. Tonight, here, as my countess." She did not answer with a word. She lifted her left hand, slowly, deliberately, and touched the sapphires at her throat. He watched her do it. His breath left him. Then she took the ungloved hand in hers and closed her fingers around the scarred palm as she had closed them, once, around a fold of paper marked in her mother's ink. "Where is the instrument?" she said. Lady Eudora, who had been listening without appearing to, tapped her fan once against the banister. "The music room. The Broadwood Grand. It has been tuned this morning. I had a suspicion." They went. The company followed at a distance that was not quite a procession, and not quite a rout. The doors of the music room were opened. The candles were already lit. On the rack of the Broadwood stood a single sheet of paper, older than the rest, its ink browned at the edges, its final bars still empty. Trevelyan had ridden ahead with it that afternoon. He had told no one but Lady Eudora. Frances sat. She spread her mother's page and the pages she had written in the West Chamber over the 10 weeks past, and she set her hands upon the keys, and she waited until the room behind her had gone entirely still. She played the nocturne from its first bar. She played it through the passage Marianne Ackland had written in the last summer of her life, and through the modulation into the minor that had stopped there, unfinished, for 10 years. She played into the bars she herself had completed by lamplight, while a scarred hand slept against her shoulder. She played to the resolution. Fitzroy stood behind her. Halfway through, quietly, he rested his right hand upon her left shoulder, bare skin to mazarine blue, the ridged palm open against her, and did not lift it again until the last chord had faded into the beams of Penhallow Court, and the candles had guttered a quarter-inch in their sockets. No one clapped. Applause would have been an impertinence. Lady Eudora at the door closed her fan against her palm once, softly, and that was enough. Later, much later, when the carriages had gone and the sapphires were laid in their velvet and the mazarine blue hung over a chair, Frances stood at the window of the room that had been given to her at Penhallow Court and unpinned the coral heart from beneath a lace shift and set it on the sill in the moonlight. Fitzroy came to the doorway. He did not cross the threshold. The banished music, he said, was only ever waiting for the right hands. No, she said, and turned to him, and the moonlight found the scar and did not look away. It was waiting to be truly seen. The rose she had pressed between the pages of her mother's nocturne, 10 weeks and a life ago, lay now upon the closed lid of a piano in Cornwall, and above it 2 hands, one scarred and one long-fingered, would meet at first light over the last chord that had ever needed to be written, and the house that had banished music for a decade would not, from that morning to the end of their lives, know a single day of silence again. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been asked to hide a gift that was truly yours, the way Frances hid her music beneath a housemaid's cap and a dead-leaf dress? Is there someone in your life who wears their scar in the open, like Fitzroy pulling the glove from his burned hand in front of all of Cornwall, waiting only for one person brave enough to see them whole? And when a forged ledger and a false brother tried to bury the truth, would you have kept playing the unfinished nocturne, or would you have closed the lid? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and love that arrives against all odds, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.